Hello everyone and welcome to our podcast. This is Testing Times. I'm fortunate to have Richard Capper with me today, who is the Energy Manager of Ibstock Brick. Good morning, Richard.
Morning, John. Hello everybody.
Cast your mind back to when we first met. Can you remember how that came around?
Yeah, I think originally you'd reached out to me on LinkedIn looking if you could get involved at the time when I was Energy Manager at Marshalls.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just happened to be on an Enco call and ended up in a breakout room together.
That's right.
And then kind of went from there. On the back of that, when I handed my notice in at Marshalls to move over to Ibstock, we had a call, I think, and I hadn't even said where I was going, and you kind of already guessed because you were doing some work or some initial introductions with Ibstock and had been around some of the sites.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a good insight for me before starting within the business of what I was going to be coming into,
Mm-hmm.
and what opportunities there were for you to help me out from the start.
So if we go back to the start, where did you start to get involved in energy management? What was the career path for you?
Yeah, so initially I started with Marshalls as an electrical apprentice in 1998. And then from there, worked my way up to electrical shift maintenance engineer. And then from there, in 2006, I got promoted to the site electrical supervisor. And as part of that role, it came with the title of energy champion for the site.
Right.
Now, initially, I wasn't too keen on taking that role because I thought it was more work and no more extra money to go with it. But the works manager thought at that time that I was the right person to take that role, and from there I really started to grow into it because I enjoy working and improving things and seeing the benefit of that. That's what kind of floats my boat. So as soon as I started getting tucked into some of the projects, so a big one initially was we were doing mixer soft starts, and we were turning the mixers off between batches rather than running from 6 o'clock on a Monday morning till 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a Friday evening, depending on the shift pattern. And then seeing the benefit of that's what really kind of got me going. From there, I was then approached by the then group energy manager within Marshalls to take in a kind of a hybrid role. And that was going to be half working for him in the Northwest region for half the week, and then the other half of the week carrying on with my role at the Wrexham site. That kind of all went quiet, and I had to take three to 4 months out of work at the beginning of 2008 because I had a open heart surgery.
Okay.
And as soon as I returned to work, he then wanted to pick that up and was again talking to me about coming into this hybrid role. And by the end of that year, it became apparent that Clyde was going to close.
Right.
So at that point, I was at risk of redundancy. And then the group said, we'd like to keep you in a full-time role. So I went into a role of group energy management engineer at that point, reporting into the group energy manager. And that was beginning of 2009. From there, it kind of really grew. Initially, going from a site role into a group role, it was quite a shock because you're on your own a lot. You haven't got the day-to-day contact with people and that banter on the shop floor, which I kind of missed. And it probably took a couple of years really to grow into that. And then from there, I really enjoyed it. I'm seeing the differences, the bigger difference I could make across the group.
It's interesting because I think I had a very similar sort of introduction to energy and management. So I was an engineer, I worked on site. And then effectively what seemed to happen is there was almost like a career progression from that. I mean, I went at it from a different angle and ended up being sort of like in consultancy. But in 2006, and specifically then further forwards when you'd advanced into 2009, energy management was still very much an unknown sort of opportunity for a lot of people. So Marshalls went early.
Marshalls had gone really early. So Marshalls initially had started in 2005. And we were doing a lot of work at that time, specifically on our site, within lighting, heating control. So we had a lot of building management systems control, which were linked into the roller shutter doors. We were recovering waste heat from compressors back into the production process to help the curing, but also to heat people and reduce natural gas within the departments. So Marshalls had really gone early, and it wasn't until I joined Ibstock really that I realised how far Marshalls probably were ahead of other people within the sector.
Interesting. I think back then, did you have an energy management software piece at that particular time?
No, the initial tender had started for an energy management software and hardware systems around the end of 2009 into 2010. So I was still really quite green in terms of my learning and what to look for on the sites. But I'm quite heavily data driven anyway. So as soon as we got that management software in and we were getting the half-hour data flowing into there for each site, and then from there we did quite a big capex project to improve the number of sub-meters within the site. Getting that data really helped us to drill into where the savings could be.
I saw when we first got involved a little bit with Marshalls, some of the intricate methods that Marshalls had gone to collect information off site. Did you remember what that looked like?
Yeah, so again, initially my boss at the time, he was keen to utilise our internal software people. And we had 3 software engineers within the business that were mainly there to reprogram machines, to make improvements to machines. And he wanted to utilise Allen Bradley PLCs as a bit of a building management system, but also data collection piece. So the sub-meters would flow into the Allen Bradley software, and then the idea was we were going to control heating and lighting all from this system, but it didn't really ever take off. All it ended up being was an expensive data logger, and that data would then flow into our energy management software where we could analyse the data. So it kind of evolved from there really, but we didn't ever go into the specifics that we've probably gone into since I've joined Ibstock.
I think the level of complexity around those PLCs requires some specific knowledge, a lot of bespoke programming, the opportunity for the potential for things to get lost, broken would be very simple, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
really?
and I think initially my boss's idea was, because I did quite a lot of programming specifically on Allen Bradley when I was on site, he thought eventually I could grow into doing all of the programming myself, as well as installing most of the hardware. So at that time, I was almost a man with a van, if you like. That's what it felt like, and the days were long and the hours were long, and it was tough. The sites weren't really bought in, if I'm honest, initially, and we didn't really see full buy-in, I would say, until 2015, when ESOS and ISO 50001 became a part of the business.
Right. Well, we'll get to compliance a little bit later on, perhaps. I think the key is from my perspective that I always kind of saw when we were going out on the sites to look at people's energy management systems, their teams of people. In a lot of instances, they were all volunteers. So the going back to your day job type stuff was always significant in terms of how that happened. And I think now there's a paradigm shift between that and where we were back then. But did you remember feeling sort of like a bit disconnected with it at certain times because you still had to do a specific job and then return to energy management? And
when I was specifically on site, do you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. So it would be a lot of breakdown work and then a lot of preventative maintenance work, and we were trying to build that in. So we had a site-specific energy plan that we were working to. And it would be, you would probably get round to the energy management piece when you had time. If there was a quiet moment, if the machines were running well, if the factories were running well, you would then try and focus on your energy plan and any opportunities within that. Specifically, the big one we had, and I'd never even heard of it at the time, never even thought about it, was the baseload piece.
Right.
So through the data that we were getting through the portals, we were able to analyse what we were using outside of operational hours, and it was quite scary. And we did a big shutdown piece of work, educated a lot of people. We had shutdown procedures, so at the end of every evening or every week, the shift managers would walk around and they would have a tick sheet, and they would make sure that they'd tick off what they'd shut down over that period of time, and then on a Monday morning we'd have an OEE meeting, or we'd have an OEE meeting every day, but specifically on a Monday morning, part of the opening meeting would be to analyse our energy consumption on the Sunday and the Saturday after 1 o'clock to make sure that people were shutting down properly.
So you used OEE, so the operational efficiencies in terms of kind of driving that forward?
Yeah, a little bit. It was part of that initial meeting in the morning. Ultimately, it was all about how the machines are running. But on that Monday morning, it would always be a little bit of a look back at the week previous and seeing what our energy consumption was like and what it was like against production metrics.
So we've used similar methods with other clients around the production data, and obviously trying to make sure that that becomes something that's a normative reference towards where to aim for. But I think as an engineer also as well, you're the eyes and the ears for all the opportunities. So you were possibly handpicked for the role realistically because you'd shown some aptitude towards being able to detect this stuff. But then obviously from a point of view being able to collate all the stuff together. So you may have been an unwilling volunteer at that particular time, but...
Yeah, I think I was lucky at that point as well because we had a good on-site team. So we had a good site engineering manager, we had a good engineering supervisor as well, and then good team leaders. So even though I was the figurehead, if you like, with the role of energy champion, a lot of the work was done by those people as well, and I feel like I reaped the benefits of their work. So I'd always say there's no way you can do this on your own, not a chance, and that's something I always promote to sites now when I'm on site, that you've got to have a strong team around you. If somebody's off, you don't want to be a single point of failure, so you can't just have an energy champion, it's got to be an energy team around that, otherwise it'll just fail.
Yeah, I had an old boss who said you should never hit home runs, which I never really worked out until I got into trouble with him. But the thing was that rings true when you are looking at energy and management. You know, the principles of ISO 50001, as you've already suggested, means that you've got to have an energy management team, and they've all got to have a specific role within it. Let's fast forward a little bit and talk about Ibstock. What do Ibstock do for people that don't necessarily?
So Ibstock's a 200-year-old business, mainly brick manufacturing, and then have expanded into concrete products as well, such as fence posts, etc. We do concrete tile, roof tiles, but the main core business is brick manufacturing for houses. Right.
And are they the largest brick manufacturer in the UK? Or?
I'm going to say yes.
It says so on the website. It's often plagiarised to a certain extent. I think so for me, that's where we managed to cut our teeth on some of the projects that you were getting involved in. What from your role at Marshalls did you see significantly different at Ibstock? Is there any commonalities or?
In the concrete side, yes. So we talk about the base loads again. It's about making sure now we've got a software management tool that we can analyse the data, which has taken some time to set up, mainly because Ibstock had worked basically on people walking around on a Monday morning, taking meter reads on a piece of paper and then putting that into a spreadsheet. They weren't using half-hour data from billing meters. They didn't have a platform to analyse that data. So it's been a big educational piece around that to show them what we've got, creating dashboards that we can display on site. That's utopia for me. That's where I want to be. That's my dream, if you like, is to walk into a site in the morning and see in the reception area or in one of their meeting rooms that they've got the energy dashboard displayed on site, that they're talking through the performances from the previous day, the week, whatever that may be, and being able to analyse that against production as well. So that was probably the biggest one. Again, my boss at the time, when he recruited me, he said, "You've been chosen because you've walked this path before." So Ibstock were quite aware that they were behind a little bit in this area. My role was a new role within the business as well. While people had dabbled in it before, they didn't have a strong energy bias. It was more about environmental or something like that, and had got involved on the energy as well. So it was a brand new role. So it was basically start from scratch. And initially, having been with Marshalls for 25 years, the first week or two were quite scary. And I was thinking, what have I done here? And it took some people close to me to say, "You've only been there a few weeks or a week. you're going to have to give yourself time. And to be fair, Ibstock CEO, I had a meeting with him in the first week, and he said to me, kind of settled me down and said, don't worry about this. You knew for the first 3-6 months, you're not going to really know anybody, you're not going to really know anything. It'll take you time to get your feet under the table. And when that comes from the leader of the business, that carries a lot of sway. And I would say the biggest thing that we've got within Ibstock is the buy-in from top management. They're really involved in all of these areas, and they take a real keen interest in how we're performing and where we can improve.
I got involved with your sustainability manager, so that's Michael McGowan. So Michael was pretty much a one-man roadshow out in the field. We sponsored the Energy Awards in 2017, and I actually physically presented an award to Michael for the best behavioural change programme, I think, back then, which again goes kind of full circle on where we were. So you'd alluded to the fact that we had some prior knowledge of the sites, and it was Michael that had asked us to do all that work. We'd prepared that as a project to potentially sell energy management as a function, as a remote service. So you walk into the role, but it was almost like an epiphany for us from a point of view that it's like, right, well, we already have this information. We've already kind of thought this through from what's missing from what we've seen. So it was quite easy then to work with you to say, right, well, here's our roadmap. Does it match your ambition, your sort of the destination for the business moving forwards? And I think that was what resonated for me. We'd obviously worked together well at Marshall's, and we'd leveraged quite a lot of technical understanding around it, but we hadn't been able to show you what we were capable of doing. So I think the important transition for us was then when we started to look at that, the whole thing started to come to life. And then we introduced the software platform to it. So in terms of numbers, so what does Ibstock Brick use in terms of electricity and gas?
Well, we've gone through a couple of difficult years because the market has been in a downturn, and that's had a big impact, specifically last year, in terms of what we were able to produce, stockyards filling up, sales not quite being there. So I've not really seen the full capacity of Ibstock yet. But if you would look at around 80 gig per annum of electricity, and then over a terawatt of gas per annum, and that was probably the big thing that shocked me. I'd gone from a business that was using around 16 gig of gas, and the main focus was around electricity, really, and then the road fleet, because 52% of Marshall's footprint was from the road fleet, to then being in a business which was heavily focused on the gas consumption, because it is such a big user in terms of energy, but also then in terms of our net zero pathway and our 2030 targets, 2040 targets. Gas is the big player.
Interesting. Where does that rank then for companies in terms of utilisation of those fuels? So gas use at a tera, where does that position Ibstock as a user of gas? Do you know?
Within the UK? It's quite interesting because our current supplier, we had a meeting with them back at the end of 2023, and one of the questions came in that from our side, where do we rank in terms of UK biggest users? And we were told we were in the top 5.
It's huge. I think the thing is that when you've got such huge numbers and different types of processes, so the factories that we've been round make different things. Primarily, we've been working with the Clay division stuff at this moment in time, but when we see these factories, there's an abundance of potential opportunity because your mind flicks towards what you've learnt from being inside a compressor room, and it's no different to anywhere else. I think some of the sophistications that you talked about with Marshall's may not be as advanced with where you currently are, but I think the magnitude of the amount of energy that you use, the opportunity must therefore be very similar in terms of reduction processes.
Yeah, it is. And the biggest shock to me probably was not only the gas consumption, but how technically difficult it is to make a brick compared to concrete. Concrete is easy in comparison, but the fundamentals are the same in terms of where we can find the opportunities, and you've got to start with the basics. So making sure the insulation of the kilns are correct, the dryers are correct, make sure that we're recapturing the waste heat from the kilns into the dryers, so then we're using less grid gas. So we will do part of the best practice that I introduced to make sure that we had a standard across the whole business when I first joined, because people were saying, yeah, we've got this best practice, but I was never able to see it. I would see different sites using different companies to perform the same service. So it was a case of, right, we're going to pick a company, we're going to do a tender, we're going to find who the best partner for us is on the thermographic survey. So we did that initially, and then it was a case of, we're now getting from that thermographic survey the energy opportunities we're getting through waste heat. That's a big one for us.
And the reuse of it.
And the reuse, yeah. We're quite good, to be fair, recapturing the waste heat. We do a lot of that back into the dryers, and the dryers in comparison are quite small users compared to the kilns. But the other thing that we've got, and this is the same, I think, whether you're in clay or within concrete, you're always nervous. You want to make sure that you make the product at the highest quality. So what we will see is sometimes the top temperatures that we're looking to fire the brick at is maybe too high, because it's better to be too high. You're not really going to cause too much damage than too low. So then that comes with extra energy usage. So that's something that we're trying to educate people with, give them the information to be able to react to that and improve our energy consumption on the back of it.
The firing up of the kilns is like an exacted science, right? The guys we worked with on a site were working in one of the kiln rooms, and they were there for days trying to get it to the right level.
So when we go into a shutdown, normally the kiln will be left running, unless you're going into a shutdown for a longer period, and I'm talking maybe over 3 weeks. Then you would actually turn the kiln off. And to go from cold to top temperature, it can take up to 6 to 7 days. So it's a science behind that. And the guys that do that, again, I probably didn't fully appreciate their talents and the information they hold within them to be able to make sure that we're doing the right things and we're not overusing. One of our sites up in the northeast, when I first joined, we looked at their energy consumption from their first fire up, and then the ceramic engineer for that region worked with them really hard in the next fire up, and we saw significant reduction in consumption because of the work that had been carried out, because of the data we were able to look at and give them.
So you've got specific people who have got specific talents around these sophisticated pieces of equipment. One thing that might be a surprise is that some of these kilns are enormous. So like the last site we were potentially working on, it's like double the size of a football pitch. So these things are going to be difficult to get to the right temperatures. They are temperamental, I would imagine. But the insulation inside those is realistically the key thing, I take it.
Yes, and the firing profiles as well, making sure that that we're firing at the right temperatures. And it probably goes back down the process, because they'll go through the dryer first. So the whole process from wet, or from when we extract the clay from the quarry and then put it through the clay prep, and then we've got two different types of processes. You've got a pressed product for a brick, and then you've got an extruded product. And there's a difference in consumption between the sites that extrude and the sites that press, which I'm only starting to feel the benefit of now. 2 years in, I'm starting to feel like I'm starting to understand this process a little bit more. And I still rely heavily on some of the group functions, like the ceramics team, to help me understand that. But yeah, so as long as we're removing the moisture from the brick through the dryer, then when it goes into the kiln, making sure that moisture is removed, because otherwise you're firing the kiln a lot harder to remove that moisture from the brick before it goes and it gets to its top temperature. Otherwise what you'll get is cracking and poor product of bricks.
And what's your wastage rate like? Is it fairly good, or
I'm not quite sure on that one.
maybe we should skip that question?
Yeah, we'll leave that one.
The whole thing then. So how large is Ibstock as a company, as an estate?
So we've got 16 sites within the clay division, and then we've got 13 sites currently within concrete. Then we've got an arm of the clay division, which we call Kevington, which has about 3 sites in it. And then we've got 3 sites within Futures. So we're on top of that with the quarries, which we have, again, there's probably four quarries that are worked every day throughout the year. And then we've got a number of, if you like, campaign quarries that will work as and when we need to. We're around 40 sites.
Right. That's a big concern.
Mm.
And how many people do you employ?
I think the last count was just over 3,100, I think, somewhere around that is the number of people Ibstock employ. Big concern. Let's have a think about compliance now. It's obviously the traction that's happened since the first iteration of ESOS has kind of gave us all a little bit of things to kind of learn about, and then the general progression towards potentially not just being as good as what you need to do for ESOS, but then the bits past it. Obviously, at the level where Ibstock are, this becomes quite complicated, obviously, because we've had some dealings with Michael, who ran sustainability. That was the lead kind of process behind it all, which may have been a bit sort of glitzy before, but now all of a sudden you're putting in some methods and reasonable proposition towards making sure that everything's working in the right way. What do you feel about the sort of compliance things that we have to go through? And this is primarily the energy saving opportunity and such like. To be honest, ESOS was a godsend in 2015. As I mentioned earlier, we had a group team, or couple of people that were working on energy, and trying to get the buy-in on site was difficult. You would have site energy champions that had an interest, and they would be the sites that you would see that would progress, and then you would have some who would almost be forced into it, if you like, maybe how I was initially, that would do bits and pieces as and when they could, and you weren't seeing the level of progression that we would like. Now, when ESOS came in and we, as a business, decided to go down the 50,001 route to use that as our route to compliance for ESOS, if you like, it was great because it was a stick to beat people with. Not only did we have this now legal compliance that we had to comply to through 50,001, we had to continually improve our energy performance. So we were able to then use those site targets to say, you've got to meet this to help us maintain legal compliance. I think it's been a real positive. I think it can do more. I think 50,001 in the latest phase of ESOS, so phase 3, which they made really late changes to at the back end of 2023.
That's
so
to do with the portal.
Yeah, really late in 2023, and I feel like it kind of devalued a little bit at 50,001 in terms of you had to have an ESOS assessment now, even if you had 50,001 and it was covering more than 95% of your energy consumption, which ours does. So just to let you know, the clay division alone is 98% of Ibstock's consumption.
Right.
So that's the big player, and that initially when I joined was the division that only had 50,001. Within 2024, we then included the concrete sites as part of that scope. So I think it kind of has been a little bit devalued, and then you have to do your ESOS action plan as well, which we've just submitted as a business ahead of the March 5th deadline. I think 50,001 carries enough weight on its own that you didn't then need that. You have energy. We have site energy plans for all of our sites anyway, and they're discussed in their tier 3 meetings on a monthly basis.
Yeah. I think ESOS was something that most customers or people had to do it as a bit of a pain in the backside. But the transition to 50,001 always seemed a little bit more complicated. However, from my perspective, I'd like 50,001. We've delivered it for a couple of clients. methodologies kind of fit the process. But it was almost like it was ahead of its time. But I think feeling now like it's a bit of a missed opportunity for a lot of people. 50,000 one's difficult if you don't have the right setup, if you don't have the right team. But clearly when you've transitioned from having clay sites on there and then also introduction of concrete sites in a very short space of time, then you must have those principles marked down, and you must have a very good top end management team who are driving this down from the other side. So the top management have really sort of suggested that this is a really good way of you nailing your colours to the mast and working as hard as you possibly can to have something that's above the ESOS compliance procedures.
Yeah, so again, going back to when I started 2 years ago, I looked at the policies and procedures that we had within our 50,001 system, and I felt they needed a refresh. So it was a complete rebuild, if I'm honest, of all the procedures. So that took a good 6 months to rebuild those, and then to drill those into the sites through the training and the educational piece, to make sites understand why we were doing this. Because the original feedback I was getting within those first 6 months as I was walking around sites was, what do you know about energy? What are you doing about energy? And it kind of felt like it had been lost a little bit after COVID. There'd been a big initial push around 2018 time, and then COVID had hit, and the market had gone through the roof actually, and it had gone the other way to what everybody expected. So it was all hands on deck. We need to produce, and I think that had probably taken priority. And again, because they didn't have someone specific in my role, it kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit. So it was a complete rebuild of the system. But then I'm heavily data driven. Having or being able to get hold of the data to be able to not only identify opportunities, but to, when we carried out a project, then be able to verify them. Because finance will be the first ones to say, we're giving you this money to do this project, show me where the savings are after you've done it. And without that data, you can't do that.
So we're now at the point where realistically we can kind of talk about a little bit of the stuff that Test has enabled for you specifically with the clay division as it stands at this moment. I know we're talking about other things and we're on to phase 2 at this moment in time, but the pilot we did for you was for 3 sites. So the benefit for you from who's supplying the software and then realistically the metering that allows you to capture some of that information, how important has that been for you to be able to move this further forwards?
It's been really important. Initially, it was a case of getting the tender done. So we had 7 to 8 companies on that initial tender to look at the different systems and look at the benefits that they could give us. And there was a team of people that were on that to make the decision, because my boss at the time said, we don't want this to just fall on your shoulders, because if it goes wrong, we don't want it to be just you that carries the can. It's got to be a team effort, which was great. And we carried out that tender process. It ended at the end of 2023. You were obviously the benefit of that. And that came because the work that you did through the preparation, you actually brought Dexmer in, and Dexmer delivered the software presentation to us and what benefits we would get. And I felt at that time it was the best system that we'd seen. So the initial part was getting the software in, then getting the billing meter data in, which threw up a lot of issues in itself, because Ibstock had never looked at it before. We were finding a lot of the gas meters and the data collectors were not sending us the data, or didn't have the data, had data issues. So then we had to get those issues solved, and we're still going through that process now. We're a lot better than we were 12 months ago.
Sure.
And we can use that now to accrue on a monthly basis, rather than relying on people to walk around with a piece of paper on a Monday morning and take meter reads. So we're using that for that. But then, as you rightly said, we did 3 pilot sites, around 20 metres on each of those sites. it's given us the benefit now of being able to drill in and look at the usage on individual pieces of equipment. Any projects that we're doing, as I mentioned earlier, we can then go, this is the before, this is the after, and then we've got a project tool within the Dexma platform which allows us to look at the before and the after.
And specifically around getting your cash back for the investments on any of the projects that you decide to invest in, which is exceptionally important. I think the other side of that then is around the carbon side of things. So obviously you're very aware of what you're emitting as a user on the carbon side of it. But is it driving more management around that as well? Yeah,
the carbon is the big player within Ibstock, if you like, at the moment, because Ibstock have made commitments to a 2030 reduction, 40% reduction in our carbon footprint by 2030, and then to be net zero by 2040. So that's a big player, and the gas, as I mentioned earlier, is the big driver in that. So it's not only about becoming efficient, it's about becoming and using alternative fuels within that to be able to hit those targets. And that's probably the roadblock at the moment. Hydrogen is going to be a big player in all of that.
For you, yeah.
Yeah. But is there a plan B? Because when I listen to people, they're still talking over 10 years away before being able to get hydrogen in certain parts of the country. Yeah. So it's a big issue. But yeah, the carbon part is the big driver in everything we're doing.
You have a specific carbon manager as well, don't you?
Yeah, we've got an ESG team. So we've got a head of ESG manager. We've got a data analyst within that team as well. So they manage the packaging up of what we're trying to do internally and then report that externally. But they've got a carbon transition plan which has been pulled from all the energy plans, partly. Those energy plans that have been implemented over the last 2 years, they're pulling that data now and saying these are the opportunities that we've got.
Excellent. We've rattled on there and maybe not covered some of the stuff that we may have wanted to, but I can't let you go without asking you about football. So would you like to tell us who you like to follow on a Saturday?
Yeah, I'm a Wrexham fan. I've been a Wrexham fan since the age of 9. My dad took me to my first game, stood on the Cop as it was then in 1989 in a playoff game against Leyton Orient on a cold it was a May evening, I think, and it was still cold then, but I was lucky enough to go on and work for the club as well for 7 years in a coaching capacity within the academy. Started with the younger age groups, worked my way up to head of foundation phase, head of recruitment, and then into my last season I was actually very lucky. And apart from the 2 days that my boys were born, I was lucky enough to stand with Joey Jones at the racecourse for a FA Youth Cup game against Accrington Stanley. That's the proudest day of my life. Being able to stand next to a legend like that at a ground that I love, for a team that I love, that was a big part of me. But yeah, me and my youngest son have got season tickets for the last 4 years now, and we're enjoying the ride. It's been probably an experience over the last 4 years since the takeover that I wouldn't want to have missed. It's
a great story. I know we talked about Rob and Ryan last night. It's a bit glitzy as well.
It is. But initially people were saying, why Wrexham? And I think Rob himself and actually Ryan has said once the documentary went live and people could see the passion within the ground, being able to fill the ground on a weekly basis now, I think people can see why. And the town needed it. The town needed the football club because it's gone through a rough time, as I think most towns have. And we needed that level of investment, not only for the football, but for the town itself and for the local community. And from that, it's driving more jobs. We'll be lucky enough within 12 months, hopefully, to be sat here and we'll have a new stand behind or where the old Cop stood, and that had stood empty and derelict pretty much for a long period of time. The investment that they've put into the club after some tough times, and people... I came out the ground after a defeat to Leyton Orient last week and had a lot of Leyton Orient fans, strangely enough, at my first game, in my face, kind of winding us up because we'd sold our soul, as they spoke. We hadn't sold our soul at all. We were going bust if Rob and Ryan hadn't come in, the club would have gone into, well, it wouldn't have ceased to exist. And that, to be fair, the club only exists because of the fans, because the fans had to bail the club out in 2013 when, unfortunately, the Football League didn't look after us and allowed two people to own the club that should never have been allowed to own it, and they tried to remove the ground and sell the ground on, and it was all for profit of themselves. So I think we've gone through enough tough times, and I think we're now reaping the benefits of what the fans deserve.
It's a good football story, with maybe not an ending at this moment in time, but it's a journey, and it's a good one. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for. There might have to be a part 2 of this, Richard.
I think there might be, because I think there's a lot that we haven't discussed that we need to discuss.
Yeah,
so
maybe.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.